All right, diving right in today, huh? We're looking at podcasts this time.
Yeah, seems like they're everywhere, right?
And it seems like you've got quite the podcast habit going, judging by all these sources you sent over research reports, think pieces, even someone recommending a tech podcast on their blog.
Quite the mix, that's for sure.
Really highlights how podcasts are going way beyond just entertainment.
Oh, absolutely. They're impacting everything from how we get our news to storytelling, even global culture. It's a pretty fascinating shift.
Definitely a deep dive worth taking. And, it's interesting because based on all this, you're already a podcast fan. So what first got you hooked? What's the appeal for you?
That's a great question.
I mean, everyone's got their reasons.
Yeah, for me, it's the flexibility. You can listen while doing other things,
Yeah.
working out, chores, the stuff you got to do anyway, unlike having to sit down and watch something.
Right. No more being tied to a TV schedule.
Exactly. And that on-demand nature is a big reason for the podcast boom, according to the podcast revolution. Their research found that over 80% of Americans know what podcasts are,
Wow.
and nearly half have actually listened to at least one. That's massive.
That is huge. And speaking of variety, one of your sources was actually a recommendation for a tech podcast. Geekzilla podcast rings a bell.
Oh, definitely. Big fan of that one.
Figures. Just goes to show how podcasts can really cater to niche interests, huh?
Absolutely. The rise of podcasting actually talks about that, how there's a podcast for practically every interest imaginable.
Like, truly, anything you can think of, there's a podcast about it.
True crime, comedy, business, personal growth. It's kind of amazing.
And the Potty Burring magazine argues that this diversity of content goes hand in hand with more diverse voices being heard, too.
Yeah, they made a good point about how podcasts cover topics and perspectives that mainstream media often misses.
It's giving a platform to people and ideas that might not have gotten that chance otherwise.
Exactly. It's like leveling the playing field,
Yeah.
Much lower barrier to entry, which is great for inclusivity.
It's really fascinating, and it connects with another point that the power of podcasts made about that conversational style of the format.
Yeah, it often feels like you're just part of a conversation.
Even with experts and celebrities, there's that feeling of intimacy.
Absolutely. That's a big part of why people are drawn to podcasts. And, it's not just about the host.
Right.
It fits into this larger trend in media. People are craving authenticity.
They're tired of that super polished, impersonal content you see everywhere.
Exactly. Podcasts with their unscripted conversations, genuine personalities, it feels real.
It's funny you mentioned the power of podcasts. They talked about how powerful that feeling of intimacy can be. And one of the other sources, Tales from a Fork, there's this story about a historical podcast.
Oh, yeah.
The writer felt like they were being transported back in time just by listening to the host's passionate narration.
That's incredible. Really speaks to how podcasts can create such immersive experiences.
Definitely. And it makes you think about the impact this is having on traditional media. It's not just competing for attention anymore. It's pushing the boundaries of how we tell stories and report news.
Right. The rise of podcasts in mainstream media really highlights that shift. Podcasts are doing serious journalistic work these days.
It's not just a hobby anymore.
Like The Daily from the New York Times. They use audio to craft these narratives, It pulls the listener in.
And then you've got NPR's Up First, with in-depth analysis and context. They're reaching a whole new audience who might not be reading newspapers.
Exactly. It's a really exciting time for audio journalism. And the entertainment world is taking notice, too.
Oh, yeah. You've got celebrities launching their own podcasts now.
And studios are adapting podcasts into TV shows and movies.
Like Homecoming, right? That thriller series that started as a podcast.
Exactly. It's blurring the lines between mediums in a really interesting way.
And it sounds like those lines are going to keep blurring even more.
Oh, for sure.
Market Research Media predicts continued growth, especially on the business side.
They're saying U.S. podcast ad revenue could hit over $1 billion this year.
Wow. And the rise of podcasting made a good point about how podcast ads are different from traditional advertising.
Yeah, they leverage that trust between the host and the listener.
It feels more like a recommendation from a friend than a sales pitch.
Definitely. But that raises questions about how to keep that authenticity as the industry grows.
It's a delicate balance for podcast creators, figuring out how to monetize while staying true to that connection with their listeners.
It's a tightrope walk, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But finding that balance is going to be crucial for the future of podcasting.
It really makes you wonder where things go from here, What's next for podcasts?
Well, technology is definitely going to play a huge role.
Makes sense, right? Tech is driving so much change these days.
Yeah, the rise of podcasts and their role talks about that, especially with AI advancing so rapidly.
AI is everywhere now.
We might start seeing more personalized recommendations powered by AI, helping listeners discover new podcasts they might love.
Like a smarter version of what streaming services do now.
Exactly. And even more seamless integration with our homes.
Oh, so like being able to listen to your favorite podcasts on any device in your house.
Exactly. It's all about making the listening experience even more convenient and personalized. And, digital gems took a step further.
Oh, yeah. They always have those thought-provoking takes.
They actually compared the potential of podcasts to the disruption Netflix brought to TV.
Wow.
They think this shift from visual to audio content could lead to podcasts becoming the dominant form of storytelling in the future.
So instead of gathering around the TV, families might be listening to these intricate audio dramas together.
Right. Or imagine commuters totally immersed in these interactive audio adventures that adapt to their surroundings.
That's almost like sci-fi stuff, but kind of cool to think about.
It is, right.
Yeah.
And it ties back to something we talked about earlier, the sheer number of people already listening.
The podcast revolution had that stat right. Over 80% of Americans are familiar with podcasts, and almost half have actually listened.
That's a huge audience. It's a testament to how podcasts are cutting through all the noise out there.
It's true. In this crazy, hyper-connected world, podcasts offer this curated, in-depth experience.
You're really choosing to spend time with a host, with their perspective. It's a different level of engagement than you get from just scrolling through social media.
And the rise of podcasting talked about how podcasts are fostering communities.
Oh, absolutely. People connect with the hosts, with each other, online and off.
It's this whole ecosystem built around shared interests, and it's only growing.
Right. It's powerful stuff. Consider how podcasts have helped amplify marginalized voices, giving a platform to those who might not have had access to traditional media.
The Burring magazine touched on that too. How podcasts can cater to these niche interests and communities that might otherwise be overlooked.
It's about giving a voice to the voiceless, and it's also changing how we learn.
Oh yeah, educational podcasts are everywhere these days.
It's making complex topics so much more engaging and accessible. We're not limited to classrooms or textbooks anymore.
Anyone with a smartphone and an internet connection can learn from experts in any field.
Exactly. And the rise of podcasts and their role made a great point about how podcasts encourage active listening.
It's not just about passively absorbing information, right?
No, it's about thinking critically and questioning what you hear.
The rise of podcasting talked about how low the barrier to entry is for creating a podcast these days. Anyone with a microphone and a story can potentially reach a global audience.
It's amazing, right? Podcasting has really democratized media production. No gatekeepers, no need for expensive equipment or a studio, just your voice and your ideas.
So we're getting all these new voices and perspectives and storytelling approaches that we wouldn't have seen before.
Exactly. And who knows what innovations are coming next.
It's exciting to think about where things go from here with technology advancing so rapidly.
Remember how digital gems compare the potential of podcasts to the rise of streaming services?
Yeah, how Netflix changed how we consume TV and movies.
Right. Podcasts have the potential to be just as disruptive. It's a paradigm shift in how we consume content. And with that in mind, there's something we haven't touched on yet, something really important. And that's the listener, right? Kind of the missing piece of the puzzle.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, we've talked about the creators and the business side and the tech, but not so much about the people actually listening.
And the rise of podcasts, along with digital gems, brought up this idea of listener responsibility.
Listener responsibility. What do they mean by that?
Well, think about it. We have so much power in our earbuds now. More than ever, we need to be mindful of how we listen. The power of podcasts talked about that intimacy we develop with the voices we listen to.
Yeah, you feel like you really know them, almost like a friend.
But that trust comes with a responsibility to be a discerning listener.
So it's not just about finding podcasts that entertain us or that we agree with.
Exactly. We need to be asking ourselves some tough questions. Am I choosing a diverse range of podcasts? Or am I just sticking to the same old voices that reinforce what I already believe?
That's a good point. It's easy to get stuck in an echo chamber, especially with algorithms feeding us content we already like.
Yeah, the Boring magazine actually used that term, echo chambers. It's great to find communities around shared interests for sure, But it's also crucial to step outside those comfort zones.
To challenge our own perspectives. Right. Make sure we're not just surrounding ourselves with people who think exactly like we do.
Exactly. It's like podcasts offer this incredible opportunity to expand our horizons, learn from people with different experiences, but we have to be mindful of that potential downside.
You mean the risk of becoming too insular, of letting algorithms dictate what we hear instead of actively seeking out diverse viewpoints.
Exactly. Active listening is key here. Being intentional with their choices, remembering that even the most trusted podcast host is just one person with their own opinions and biases.
It's like what we were saying about Tales from a Fork, how that writer felt transported back in time by a historical podcast. It shows the power these voices can have.
And that power is only going to grow as we move towards these more personalized audio experiences. Think about it. As AI gets better at curating content for us, it's going to be so easy to just let the algorithms take over. But that can lead to intellectual isolation.
Right. We have to be the ones in control, making sure we're getting a balanced diet of information, seeking out those ideas that make us think differently, that challenge our assumptions.
It's about staying curious, engaged, and informed, really taking ownership of our own learning journey.
That's such a powerful takeaway, and I think it applies to so much more than just podcasts. It's about how we approach all the information we encounter in this ever-evolving media landscape. So to our listeners out there, as you continue to explore the world of podcasts, remember to listen wisely, seek out diverse voices, challenge your own assumptions, and be an active participant in shaping your own audio journey. And with that, happy listening.